equity, life expectancy, and power building. We are very happy to have you here today and to be offering our second webinar. To make sure that everyone is able to hear today's excellent lineup of speakers, Jasneet will start us off with a quick audio check and provide instructions for making use of the simultaneous Spanish interpretation provided by Javier during this webinar. Jasneet?
Thank you, Manal. So please make sure your computer audio is not muted to listen to this webinar. We are recording the webinar, and so we'll begin recording now. So next slide, Roxy. This webinar also has simultaneous Spanish interpretation, so please listen carefully to assign yourself to the right channel. We strongly suggest everyone join this webinar using a recent version of the Zoom app on your computer or smartphone. We do not recommend using a browser or dial-in. There are two audio options, channels, English and Spanish. You must select one for optimal experience. Only from within the Zoom app can you select a language channel. If you don't select one, you may hear both English and faint Spanish at the same time. Multiple audio channels is a newer feature of Zoom, so your app must be up to date to work properly on this webinar. And now I will walk us through how to select an audio option. If you are joining on a computer, please click the globe icon at the bottom right of your screen to select a language. Select English or Spanish, then click Mute Original Audio, and finally click Done. My colleague Roxy will now explain this in Spanish for monolingual Spanish speakers.
Hola, buenas tardes todos. Si están en este meeting usando una computadora, por favor hagan clic en el globo para seleccionar el idioma que usted gustaría escuchar. En este caso sería seleccionar el lenguaje en español. Y si usted hace clic en eso, también puede silenciar el audio original. Y cuando usted seleccione Mute Original Audio. Jasneet?
Thank you, Roxy. If you're joining from a smartphone or tablet, you will select the More option or the three dots located at the bottom of your screen and follow the same steps by clicking the language interpretation, then selecting English or Spanish, and then selecting Mute Original Audio. Finally, click Done. Roxy, please explain this in Spanish as well. Thank you.
Si usted está usando su teléfono Android, iPhone o su tableta, por favor haga clic en donde dice más o more o también tiene los tres puntitos. Haga clic en donde dice interpretación de idiomas. Después haga clic en idioma que le gustaría escuchar. En este caso sería español. Al último, por favor, haga clic y seleccionar audio para silenciar audio original. Y no se olvide seleccionar Done para que todos sus settings se queden donde usted indicó.
Thank you so much, Roxy. So everyone should now be on the language channel of their choice. We can drop these instructions into the chat, and so please use the chat function to communicate with our team to troubleshoot any technical issues. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Manal.
Thank you, Jasneet. Gracias, Javier y Roxy. My name is Manal Abalata, and I am Deputy Executive Director at Prevention Institute. Prevention Institute is a national nonprofit organization focused on preventing illness and injury before they happen and addressing the factors that influence community health, safety, and well-being. We are pleased to present this webinar series to share findings from our recent work on park equity and life expectancy. We led this project in partnership with the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health at the University of California at Los Angeles Center for Healthy Climate Solutions and a community advisory board that we formed for this project. Today, you will hear from several of our advisory board members. As I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is part 2 of a 2-part series. The first webinar was on November 18th, and UCLA professor Dr. Michael Jarrett described results from the new research linking park access to life expectancy. If you weren't able to join us last month, the full recording of that webinar is available on Prevention Institute's website using the link that appears on the slide. The work that we did was supported by the Urban Institute as part of a $2 million national initiative with funds provided from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We were one of 10 grantees who participated in this effort, which was about using local census tract level data to support power building and advocacy. As you will hear from today's speakers, our project was based in Los Angeles County, but it provides insights for cities across the country. And we are so glad that so many of you have joined us in this work. If you could please advance the slide, that would be great, to the webinar series co-sponsors. We would also like to thank our co-sponsors for the webinar series, which include all the organizations' logos who you see here, many of whom were our Community Advisory Board members, as well as partners at the National Parks and Recreation Association serving as a co-sponsor today. We thank you all. This work is not possible without partnership like yours. During today's webinar, I will first briefly review the UCLA research findings on park access and life expectancy. Next, we will hear from Elva Yanez, Prevention Institute's Director of Health Equity and Director for the project we're discussing today. She will provide an overview of the production of park inequities, share a park equity framework that we are using to guide our work, and review policy recommendations and the role that power building has in advancing park equity. Then we will hear from Dr. Alessandro Rigolone, who will be moderating our panel today. Dr. Rigolone is an assistant professor in the Department of City and Metropolitan Planning at the University of Utah. His line of research centers on planning for urban green space and health equity using an environmental justice lens. We findings and recommendations can be used to advance this work. We will then transition to our park equity and power building panel discussion, which I am sure you will enjoy. Francisco Romero, Naomi Humphrey, and Veronica Padilla, all members of our Community Advisory Board, will be sharing with you work that they have done and their thoughts about how to advance this work moving forward. Then we'll be hearing from Norma E. Garcia, Director of Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Recreation. Norma will provide a park practitioner leadership perspective to share implications of research and the recommendations for park agencies and the efforts to proactively reverse park inequities from her position. Norma has dedicated her career to building thriving communities throughout the county, and she works tirelessly to achieve this through her active participation in many civic and professional organizations. Norma is the first woman, first person of color, first Latina to hold the highest post in the County Department of Parks and Recreation since its founding in 1944. As the COVID-19 pandemic has unfolded, Norma has led the department to continuously offer access to parks and open spaces for respite, mental, physical, and emotional well-being, while working hard to follow the proper public health restrictions in partnership with the local Department of Public Health. Norma convened over 90 park and recreation agencies and cities in Los Angeles to create protocols and safety measures to enable an effective recovery process and allow for reopening of these critical spaces. Finally, we will do our best to open up as much time at the end for question and answer for all of you who have joined us here today. Before I briefly review the research findings on park equity, park access and life expectancy, Jasneet will also explain how to submit questions using the Q&A, not the chat function, during this webinar, so we can collect your questions and answer as many of them as possible. Jasneet?
Thank you, Manal. So throughout today's webinar, we invite you to submit any questions you have via the Q&A box. To submit a question, simply click on the Q&A box in the meeting controls located at the very bottom to open up the window. Then type in your question into the box and click send. If you see a question appear in the Q&A box that you also would like, you can upvote it by clicking on the thumbs up icon. We'll be answering questions live and in written text through the Q&A window. We will try our best to answer as many questions as possible in the allotted time. And now I'm going to hand it back to Manal to briefly review the life expectancy research findings.
Thank you, Jasneet. As I mentioned, in 2019, with funding from Urban Institute's Powering Healthy Lives initiative, we set out to explore the relationship between the availability of parks and life expectancy at the census tract level using United States small area life expectancy estimates. The life expectancy is a gross population level estimate of the average number of years people can expect to live. It is calculated by averaging across a population and serves as one indicator of overall community health. Life expectancy in LA County has a big range from 69 years to 93 years in some parts of the county. These reflect great inequities based on race, place, and other socially constructed factors. We found that if we could increase access to park acreage in the most high-need communities, we had the potential to increase life expectancy for LA County residents, especially in areas that have significant park deficits, low tree cover, and low vegetation compared to other areas of the county that were at the median level for these factors. On the next slide, we show that adding parks can increase life expectancy. The study used a predictive model and built upon the work of the historic comprehensive LA County Park Needs Assessment, which used park acreage as one of the main measures in determining need. Our study found that if all the census tracts in LA County with park deficits and low tree canopy could increase up to the median level, which is about 54 acres within a 2-mile radius of each census tract, LA County would likely see considerable life expectancy gains for all the residents living in those census tracts. The model showed that about 164,700 years of life expectancy could be gained across the population. And we found that if we targeted those investments in park infrastructure towards Latino and Black residents, we could specifically gain 118,000 years of added life expectancy for those two groups. As I said, while the focus of this project was in LA, we believe that the underlying conditions and the strategies to reverse inequities are relevant throughout the United States. Please review the archived webinar for a deeper review of the research. Now I am so pleased to turn it over to my colleague, Elva Yanez, who will be sharing policy frameworks and practices that have addressed park inequities. Elva?
Thank you, Manal, and thanks everyone for being here with us today. We appreciate your interest and support. As Manal said, we're going to focus on the policy aspects of this work that we just completed. And for my presentation, I'll go over how park inequities came about in the first place, share PI's park equity framework, and briefly review our policy recommendations and toolkit content. Some of this information was reviewed in the first webinar. So for those of you who were on that call, please bear with us. This information, however, is worth repeating since we cannot develop effective strategies to reverse park inequities unless we understand how they came about in the first place. As a grounding for today's conversation, Prevention Institute defines park inequities as the unfair and unjust distribution of parks, green spaces, and other resources by place, race, income, and other factors. Park equity, on the other hand, is the fair and just distribution of these resources such that the differences between population groups are not measurable or observable. There's a growing body of evidence that demonstrates that park inequities exist in communities all across the United States, but they're primarily found in low-income Black and Brown neighborhoods. The park deficit situation in Los Angeles County, shown on this map, exemplifies the production of park inequities and how they compound health inequities, again, by race and place. By the same token, it's important to recognize that the LA region has been an important proving ground for strategies to reverse park inequities through both power building strategies as well as public-private partnerships for at least 2 decades. Structural inequities are at the heart of uneven distribution of park space, recreational programming, and other resources and services. The graphic here presents these structural drivers as gears, because like gears, the policies and practices underlying park inequities interact with each other and exacerbate each other over time to produce inequities at the community level. Some of the historic factors contributing to park inequities are shown in these gears and include racial segregation, biased planning decisions, exclusionary zoning, racial covenants, and redlining, among others. These drivers of inequities are reinforced by norms and deeply held beliefs, assumptions, and ways of working that shape institutional culture and reinforce the status quo when it comes to park inequities. Some of the contemporary or present-day drivers of park inequities include shifting responsibility for public services, the reduced ability of low-income cities with limited tax bases to provide park and recreation services, and the anti-tax movement. It's also important to keep in mind that local and state factors can also play a role in the production of park inequities. So for example, in 1978, California voters enacted Proposition 13, which restricted local property tax increases and devastated the budgets of local government agencies. Here in the city of Los Angeles, Proposition 13 left the Department of Recreation and Parks unable to acquire parkland for a number of years, resulting in some of the most severe park deficits among large US cities. However, our experience and those of others have taught us that just as park inequities have been produced, it is possible to create pathways to equity. Reversing park inequities not only eliminates the gaps between the haves and the have-nots, but because, as research by Dr. Manuel Pastor has shown, inequities hamper regional growth and prosperity. So reversing park inequities could, for example, help eliminate economic losses associated with excess healthcare costs and support regional climate change adaptation. So how do we create these pathways to equity? In our policy brief, we apply the health equity framework to park inequities. This framework was informed and inspired by work of USC's Equity Research Center and the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. It's organized around 3 core equity objectives and 3 domains of time. Our health equity framework helps advocates and practitioners operationalize equity. And that's the key to achieving equity. You have to intentionally operationalize it. The framework prompts users to specify the nature of the inequity at hand. Is it procedural, distributional, or structure in nature? Users are then prompted to identify actionable and sequential strategies that are aligned with the domains of time, past, present, and future, that would ultimately reverse these inequities. we'll be distributing the framework tool as a follow-up to our webinar. So here's an example of how the framework might work or might be used in a community that has obvious inequities in the distribution of park space. Starting with a white column on the left, one way to address past harms might be for the local park agency to partner with community groups to analyze the distribution of parkland using GIS mapping technology. With a clear understanding of these inequities in the present moment, the partnership could then develop a tailored strategic plan to address them. And then thinking about the future and structural resource barriers, this partnership could then work in collaboration with elected officials, for example, to advance a public funding measure that prioritizes investments to reverse these inequities by creating an equity set-aside. Comprehensive strategies like the one I just mentioned are essential for reversing inequities, but we know from experience that they're just one piece of the equity puzzle. Having good solutions in your back pocket doesn't mean that they will be acknowledged, accepted, or implemented by decision makers. And as the saying goes, power concedes nothing without a demand. Power building for policy, and systems change is key to achieving park equity. You'll hear more from our community panel about power building strategies and tactics, such as building resident and organizational capacity, changing the dominant narrative, participating in policy decision-making, and watchdogging enacted policies. To support the movement for park equity in LA County and beyond, we developed 12 policy recommendations directed at park agencies, funders, and elected officials. And those 12 recommendations are in the policy brief. The recommendations focus on policy and systems change and can serve as North Stars for the power building work of nonprofits and coalitions, as well as agencies and elected officials who are committed to health equity and racial justice. Taken together, these clear policy objectives, a strategic plan to achieve them, and leadership by those most impacted by the problem, you then have a roadmap to park equity. And for people working outside of LA County, the recommendations that we've developed are broad enough to be adapted for local conditions and circumstances. Our 12 recommendations focus broadly on increasing investments in park infrastructure in divested park poor communities, funding base building and frontline groups to build their capacity to advocate for park equity from a policy and systems change standpoint, conducting research to document inequities, evaluate any kind of equity intervention that's developed and put into place, and also to produce timely, accessible data. Developing public finance measures that explicitly advance equity and also include authentic representation from marginalized communities in the committees that sponsor these measures. That's something that really hasn't happened up until this time. And developing best practices and model policies to prevent and mitigate green displacement at the municipal level. So before I hand it over to Alessandro, I want to quickly go over our toolkit. It's located on our website, and it was designed to equip community advocates and others with evidence to make a compelling case for public investments in park infrastructures in the highest need communities. Again, while the content focuses on the LA region, these tools have relevance to communities throughout the US. The toolkit includes a tip sheet that provides descriptions of the various documents and then suggestions for how you might use them from an advocacy perspective. The toolkit includes life expectancy and park access research report and policy brief, an overview that summarizes these two documents, 3 community profiles that home in on our research findings for South LA, Boyle Heights, unincorporated East LA, and Northeast San Fernando Valley. And note that both the overview document and these profiles are available in Spanish, and a set of slides and script that go over our major findings. And finally, there's a set of 31 amazing maps that I'm very proud of that reflect our findings and show precisely where investments should be made to close park access and life expectancy gaps. And with that, I will thank you again for joining us today and turn it over to Dr. Alessandro Rigolon.
Hello, everybody. My video has been disabled, but I don't know if I can speak without the video, but I can speak without a video. I guess I'll start without. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Elva, for the great talk. And thanks to the whole Prevention Institute for inviting me to participate. I'm going to provide some quick reflections on park equity work nationwide and sort of embed some of the lessons that Elva just shared. Here I am. Hi. All right. So as Elva just suggested, the challenge of reversing park inequities is a huge one, because we really have to face the legacy of decades of systemic racism. The good news is that some cities around the country have shown that park equity work is possible and can be successful. And so based on my sort of evaluation of what's going on around the country, I've seen a few common threads in park equity work that are promising. And these threads are embedded in the toolkit that the Prevention Institute has recently published. So the first one is to aim for systemic change. Because park inequities exist due to systemic policies and systemic racism, we need equity-oriented policy change to reverse them. One park at a time will not move the needle that much, although it's important, but changes in city, county, and state policies will. For example, if you're from California, you know that the success that state bonds like Prop 68 are having in dedicating funds to park poor low-income communities. The second one is focusing on public health and health equity for advocacy. As the PI suggests in their toolkit, successful advocates have used both public health and health equity as key arguments for the need to advance access to parks for marginalized communities. And so following the example of what the PI has done in Los Angeles, park equity in other cities could partner with local universities, people like me, to develop evidence on the health impact of those park inequities. The third point is that we need to focus on racial equity deliberately in all these initiatives. So racial equity needs to be embedded in city ordinances and policies, but not only that, not just towards money. And so those initiatives for racial equity need to be funded and sustained over time. And Minneapolis is a city that has been working on that for a while right now. And the fourth point is one organization on their own is probably not enough. And so we need to harness the power of partnerships and coalitions. And so we know that major wins for policy change have indeed resulted from coalition efforts, including groups like Parks Now California that operate across an entire state. So although the work on park equity is increasing and it's a good thing, this work could also backfire and lead to what we call green gentrification. And so recently there's been a lot of initiatives and research on efforts to limit gentrification that is at least in part fostered by green space development, as some of that work has been embedded in park equity initiatives. So just for a quick refresher, many of you might know, but there's research showing that when we establish large parks in low-income communities, those parks are often a driver of gentrification. And due to this issue, we have low-income communities of color around the country that face the very tough conundrum to have to choose between having a great park and an affordable home and staying put in their neighborhood. A project that for which this conundrum has been shown is shown here, is the 606 Trail in Chicago. So I've done some work on that, and in a recent policy brief, John Christensen, who was at UCLA, and myself identified 26 different types of what we call parks-related anti-displacement strategies that have been implemented nationwide. Based on our research, we have a few best practices for the implementation of these strategies. including the importance of starting really early, and start planning for park equity at the same time when you plan for those anti-displacement strategies, as well as the need to use some complementary and sort of integrated approaches. So as for related park equity work, our research also suggests that systems change is key. Again, we want to create policies at the state or county or city levels that address those issues. And so, for example, park funding that is targeted to low-income communities of color should also incentivize or require the implementation of some anti-displacement strategies near future parks when those parks are large and are likely to displace long-time residents. So to wrap it up, my sort of brief points, the collaborative approach that the PI has used in their toolkit and other projects they work on can really lead the way in the complementary struggles for park equity and for limited displacement. That includes integrating impactful research, policy analysis, and collaborating with community-based partners that can take findings of this research and use them to advance policy and system change in their community. So that was the end of my little introduction. And now I'm excited to sort of opening up to our community advisory board panel, which includes three wonderful speakers. I'm gonna quickly introduce them. So the first one is Veronica Padilla, who is the executive director of Pacoma Beautiful, a historically woman-led grassroots environmental justice organization in the Northeast San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, one of LA County's most environmentally challenged and park poor areas. Veronica has been with the organization for 10 years. She grew up in the San Fernando Valley and still lives there. She also serves as a City of Los Angeles Planning Commissioner and as an urban planner, works to develop community of leaders and to improve the welfare of people by providing access to healthy and safer community. Our second speaker will be Francisco Romero, who is the program manager of the community transformation at Promesa Boyle Heights. Francisco joined Promesa in 2017 as an organizer and coordinated Park Equity Alliance, which is a Los Angeles county-wide advocacy network, as well as a resident-led advocacy for equitable distribution of park funding, LA County Measure A. Francisco is leading the development of key early learning strategies as part of Promesa Career Program, as well as supporting advancing the collective efforts around integrated wellness, education justice, and immigrant rights. And last but not least, Naomi Humphrey. She's an alumna of the National Equity Foundation Build Health Initiative at Thomas Jefferson Senior High in South Central Los Angeles. It was through the BUILD program where she came to think critically about the disparities in her built environment and develop a commitment to dismantling them. She's currently an undergrad student at UCLA, and she continues to advocate for park equity and spatial justice for her home community as a member of a LA county-wide advocacy network known as the Park Equity Alliance, and also serving as National Health Foundation Health Equity Fellow. I forgot to say, but I should, that all the three speakers are former members of the Powering Healthy Lives Through Parks Community Advisory Board. And their communities are featured in the three community profiles in the toolkit. So enough of me speaking. So I'm gonna now ask two sort of similar questions to Veronica and Francisco. And let's start with Veronica. So I guess the first, the first questions are, I'm going to ask both, and you can sort of take it from there. But I think we would like you to briefly describe how park equity fits in the broader work of Pacoma Beautiful, and sort of tell us a story or more than one story that sort of is an example of power building for your park equity work.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on this panel. It's great to see so many participants here today and allowing me to share a little bit more about Pacoma Beautiful, our community, our challenges, and our successes. So if you don't mind, I'll do the presentation, which is basically a lot of pictures of our successes and our challenges throughout, our efforts in creating more open space in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. Is that okay, Alessandro, if I do that? Okay.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, great. So good morning, or no, good afternoon. Again, my name is Veronica Campos, Executive Director of Pequena Beautiful. It's a pleasure to work for Pequena Beautiful because it is where I grew up. And I recently moved to out of the city. So Alessandro, just a quick correction. I no longer serve on the Planning Commission because I moved out of the city. But now Yvette Lopez Ledesma took my place, and I think they are better off with Yvette because she's wonderful and a great park advocate too. So city's very lucky to have her there now. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is just these slides are full of pictures of our projects. This is Adopt a Lot in North Hills. This is a motion that Councilwoman Monica Rodriguez put together to really ask the city to use underutilized vacant parcels around communities. And this particular parcel in North Hills was one of the first ones, and Pequena Beautiful was privileged to participate in this collaborative effort and really engage the community around the vacant lot to see what they would like to see here. And we worked with other partners like KDI to develop the play equipment, and we had a large kind of grand opening for community to come and enjoy and really envision this vacant lot as green space. And it's near a school that focuses on art. So it's really been a great collaborative. Unfortunately, COVID has put a stop to some of that work, but we look forward to continue that collaboration and providing this space for community. So we can go to the next one. This is Bradley Alley, and Bradley, I wish I had more pictures to show you guys, but Bradley Alley was a really unsafe alley next to the San Fernando Gardens, one of the largest public housing developments. And it tees off with our Bradley Plaza. Our Bradley Plaza was a pilot program for the People Street. We identified it as a potential street that can be vacated and turned into a public plaza. And fortunately, we won that, and Bradley Plaza was activated. We did a Kickstarter and raised some money for some furniture there. And it really was an asset for the community, but we were fortunate enough to work with other partners like LA Sand, DWP, and the council office, and then Liberty Hill and LA Waterkeeper that helped us gain a few $1 million to be able to expand our project and really beautify the plaza and also beautify the alley there. So this is a multi-benefit project that not only is greened up, but also infiltrates water, which is a lot of it is runoff from the local industries around there. So we are able to infiltrate, clean the water, replenish our aquifers, and provide this beautiful space for the community, which they were a part of from the very beginning. They came up with the design where they picked the flowers. They, if you can kind of see there, that greenish blue, that is like, it emulates a little river, water flowing. So now we were able to improve both the alley and the plaza and become this new amenity. And I will say that our designers that were originally chosen, we did have to push back a little bit because some of what the community was saying didn't really fit what their artistic views were or vision for the project. So I just think it's very important to ensure that our community members do have a voice, and we are able to push back when needed, because they do know what the community needs or what they enjoy or whatnot. And we did have a little bit of items that we forgot or really didn't think about when designing this, but we were able to hear from the community afterwards and fix it. For example, we thought the meandering path of the alley would slow down traffic. Yes?
Hi, Veronica. Sorry to interrupt you. We just want to address a technical issue. Some folks are having a hard time hearing you. And so we're just going to quickly just let folks know, in order to make sure you can hear Veronica clearly, either you must select a language, so that's English using the globe function icon at the bottom, or unmute original audio. So either of those two options should fix the audio. We'll drop the instructions one more time in the chat so folks can fix their audio and we can troubleshoot, but just please make sure you're either on the English channel or you have unmuted your original audio. Thank you. Back to you, Veronica. Sorry about that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, should I just speak a little bit more and see if that helped folks?
So I think, so folks can only hear you if you unmute your original audio. So folks just need to do that. So I think it's totally fine, Veronica, if you keep speaking, we'll just troubleshoot with folks in the chat.
Okay, great. Okay. Can't remember where I left off. But I can go on to the next slide for our next project. Maybe start. Okay, great. This is Jardín Pocuema. Jardín Pocuema is the first sidewalk garden in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. We planted this garden on Earth Day of last year, and I have to admit that I wasn't sure this was going to work out, but my staff convinced me, and I'm glad they did. Because we turned this the sidewalk, which was traditionally a place for folks to dump bulky items and whatnot, and it was a real nuisance for the community. And we transformed it into this sidewalk garden. And if you see that group there of women at the bottom, there's some men too. They are local neighbors that have become the caregivers of the community. They're out there every day at 6 a.m. watering the garden. A big issue is that we did not have a water source, which was one of my hesitations in planting it. But it's been beautiful to see how the local residents have really taken ownership, and the community has also embraced it. And we've gotten calls about how do you plant more of these around the area. So this garden has lots of fruit trees, avocado trees, cucumbers, chiles, a lot of different things. And it's really great to see people come by and volunteer just randomly and pick the fruit and really have taken ownership of it. And that's really what we're all about at Pocuema Beautiful, is basically providing resources to do these types of community-led efforts. And really, when they are community-led is when we see the most success. Let's go on to the next one, please. This is Pocuema Wash. These are a little older pictures, but this is when we first worked on our Pocuema Wash vision plan. The Pocuema Wash is a tributary of the LA River, and in Pocuema, it's all concrete essentially. But on the sides, it has a lot of open space, and our youth group actually identified it as an underutilized space where parks could be built. So we wrote a grant to the County Public Health Department, and fortunately they granted us the grant for us to look at this space and consider it as an amenity for the community. So when we first started talking to the community members, they weren't really sure what we were talking about. They were like, what's the Pocuema Wash? We even have a hard time translating in Spanish. But what we decided to do is that it was important for us to actually go on the wash, walk the wash, and have community members do that with us to be able to allow them to envision what this kind of wash could be. And so we did that. You see the community there, that they're actually on the wash, walking it. They're holding these big maps and pointing out some opportunities and things they would like to see. If you go to the next slide. One of some of the folks that you saw standing there holding the maps, they're on the Haddon Bridge. This is the only pedestrian bridge that goes across from Richie Valens Park over to the community, which is really close to San Fernando High School. And that bridge, if we go to the next one, you can see those bollards, overgrown palm trees there. But as you can see, it gets utilized a lot. A lot of walking happens there because it's the best way for students to get to the San Fernando High School. And also from the other side, parents walk over to get to Telfair Elementary. And as you can see, it's not the easiest thing to get around. So we did a little bit of survey, just counting how many people used it, and realized that there was a big problem. Those bollards didn't allow it to be ADA compliant, and it was just a real issue. So we took some of our grant money to do some improvements. And we had a lot
Veronica,
of community meetings. Yes.
Excuse me. We went quite a bit over time, so in the interest to let Francisco and Naomi speak to, if you could please wrap it up. Thank you.
Can we just do the last slide just so you guys see how nice it ended up?
Sure.
The last one.
Sounds good.
And just wanted to mention that it was the community who picked the color of the bridge. They're the ones that planted everything, and they even chose the type of trash bin that we put and the type of bollards. So they were really involved from the beginning to the end. So I show these pictures just to demonstrate how we work with community in every project that we do. It takes a long time, but working together really makes these stuff happen. So my last slide is my contact. Sorry, I went over. But thank you for the opportunity, and maybe we can have a dialogue later. But appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Next is Francisco Romero from Promesa, Boyle Heights. Francisco, if you can keep it within 7 or less minutes would be great, just so we don't run too much over time. I appreciate it.
Got you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, first of all, to the Prevention Institute team for the amazing work in getting us, bringing us all together. We believe that it's precisely that, getting together, which breathes life into the possibilities of creating community, organizing, and making systems change impact. Somebody mentioned earlier around that we can't do it by ourselves. It's really about community and alliance building. I'll refer to that in a second. I selected this graph here for the first slide because I think it encapsulates a lot of how we operate and looking at when we're working to build a power building, base building, resident-led movement for whatever issue it is that we're working on. All the way from the opportunity to the actual policy change, and then the cycle repeats itself. We'll discuss that in a second. I do want to credit Community Catalyst for this wonderful graph that I love to use all the time. Next slide, please. So just briefly, who is Promesa? Promesa, we are a cultivator, convener of action-based partnerships, a capacity builder, and organizing collaborative, united to have collective impact at the individual, community, school, and systems level. We have teams that are working in several different schools in Boyle Heights, all with the framework of working with partners, partner agencies, parents, students, to make the impact from cradle to career, ensuring that we provide the best opportunities for the children and our families in Boyle Heights. As you can see, we have several areas that we initially looked at as Promesa Bow Heights. You see them on the right from early learning all the way down to economic development. But we were thoughtful in the process around thinking of building towards getting to all those issues. Right now, we're working on early learning, working in the schools with the community schools transformation team. We have Promotoras de Bienestar. We also we move with the times. And so, for example, our resident leader body uplifted the importance when there was a lot of immigration raids happening to create a wing of the movement to make sure that we have an immigrant rights campaign, for example. Next slide, please. So we, as mentioned, are a resident-led organization that believes that the residents themselves are the ones that understand the situation, the concerns, the problems in the community, but also they hold a lot of the solutions. And so to get to that, what we do is convene and dialogue. Really briefly, this cycle that you see here is one that is traditionally used, framed by Paulo Freire, right? The whole educación popular, popular education, where it's, dialogue, community, the theory piece, then the action, and then the reflection, and then the cycle repeats itself. And we believe in that it's really important to always have that in mind, that it's not just theory, but it's action and reflection. Next slide, please. And as an example, we entered into work with First 5 LA several years back, and talking about starting where the residents were. The residents themselves did a community-based action research to find out what were the core issues. And one of the biggest things that came up was the need for parks and open space, or the lack of parks and open space, because there was high level stress in our neighborhood. So the residents themselves were the ones that uplifted what those needs were and highlighted things like, there's a park in front of my house, but we don't use it. And so that's an issue. What can we do to improve that? Next slide, please. And really briefly, we then developed with the residents, co-developed a curriculum that had these 3 strategies, right? Which included leadership development. And you see the first tier there at the top that had different levels to it. Something that Community Catalyst calls the pyramid of engagement, kind of first getting interested in the topic, then getting involved, then becoming an active participant, and then the long-term commitment, which is what needed. We also had the strategy around information, resources, connection. And lastly, this is where we come in around regarding the Park Equity Alliance. We started developing a parks and open space resident-led committee. Next slide. And the residents co-developed alongside with us a curriculum that really dove deeper into how the whole park system works, right? Where the funding comes from, land use. You see the different themes that we went to. All this to say is that the power of convening and having these type of meetings is super important to really develop the curriculum, but also to step back and follow the residents' lead as they fight for these things that they had identified previously. Next slide, please. And just some few shots. Some of these are pre-COVID shots, but we recently also had this one where it was during the time of COVID, where we did go out and do some community engagement around a park project, working with the county parks department and other groups in developing a park design. So I just wanted to share just a few of those pictures. The power of the people, as we say. Next slide, please. And we've stated several times here today, other speakers have, that we can't do it alone. So we developed, from things that nothing comes from out of thin air. There was already organizations meeting and coming together around park equity, but around the time leading up to the vote for the park equity Measure A vote, we formed an official kind of localized park equity alliance with some of our partners that you see here. And we are specifically now targeting to strengthen and deepen these ties to continue this movement for the long term. Next slide, please. And here are some of the equity provisions that we were able to achieve and win through this, one of the campaigns that we did as the Park Equity Alliance. And briefly, at 7 minutes, it's the 30% carve out of the funding going to parks, technical assistance program, an anti-displacement avoidance policy framework, and the robust engagement scoring criteria for the funding and the applicants that are going to develop parks in our community. Next slide, please. And lastly, I'll end by saying that these are some of the things drawn and uplifted from the Measures Matter document. It really, in essence, talks about the importance of supporting grassroots, development. And what this really means at its core is investing in community-based organizations, adequately resourcing those type of base building organizations, but also allowing for general operation costs, and especially, again, the leadership development piece, because we believe the movement is led by the people. So we have to have people at the table. And the way you do that is by creating these type of spaces, as mentioned in this presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisco. This was wonderful. Naomi, if you're ready, it's the stage is yours.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. Very excited to be here today. My name is Naomi Humphrey, and I'm a youth spatial justice advocate and health equity fellow at National Health Foundation, based here in Los Angeles. I was first introduced to the concept of park inequity back in high school when I participated in National Health Foundation's Build Health Initiative. The Build Health Initiative was a community-based action plan that focused on implementing upstream solutions to target health barriers faced by residents of historic South Central. The plan focused on 3 key barriers to health: lack of access to healthy food, crime and safety concerns, and then, of course, lack of access to green space and open space for physical activity. As a resident of historic South Central myself, I could see that there was a limited number of parks in my community, and the parks and rec centers that were accessible weren't nearly as well kept or managed as those in more affluent communities. On Saturdays, when my family planned to visit a nice park, we would often find ourselves leaving our own community to do so. This is one of the main reasons I and many of my peers and teammates decided to join NHF when they brought the Build Health Initiative to our high school. Next slide, please. My peers and I conducted park assessments on all 14 parks in our district. We derived a community audit tool from the 2016 LA County Comprehensive Needs Assessment to do so. The audit tool evaluated parks based on amenities, the condition of facilities, and then most importantly, accessibility. It was composed of questions like, are there restrooms at the park? Are these restrooms usable? Are there drinking fountains? And if so, are they usable? Are there benches, tables, places where families can sit, and so on. Next slide, please. And accessibility questions such as, was the park easy to find in person? Are there signs around the park, such as the park name, a park map, park have? Are these entry points blocked or locked? And oftentimes we would find that parks in historic South Central, parks in our communities, there were a lot of entry points blocked or locked. Is there public transit near the park? And then with all these answers to these questions, we would number them, and eventually these parks would get scores for each of the questions answered. Next slide, please. To see if our parks fared any differently from parks from a neighborhood with a similar size and population density of historic South Central, we used the same audit tool to assess parks in Santa Monica. We assigned each park a letter grade, with A as the highest score and F being the lowest. And as you can see on this report card, Santa Monica parks averaged around a C grade, while parks in historic South Central averaged around an F, based on our audit tool. Several conditions contributed to the low park grades in the community, including graffiti, damaged equipment, old playground sets, broken lights, unkept bathrooms, and most importantly, limited amenities, such as volleyball courts, tennis courts, broken basketball nets, and so on. After compiling all the data and organizing our research into this report card, we shared our findings with local groups in the community, like our neighborhood council. Our neighborhood council recommended we find a way to share this information, to empower our community, to mobilize them, to engage them, to inform them of this information in a clear and concise way in order to do some community building. Next slide. We decided to do this community building in a way that would simultaneously increase park pride and then also display our research. We did this by hosting the South Los Angeles Park Pride Day at one of our lowest rated parks, South Park. The day that we like to call Slap Day, South Los Angeles Park Pride Day. We had giveaways of school supplies, diapers, food, games, prizes, activities where children and families could come and have fun and be entertained, but also be informed of some of the research that was going on in the community for the over the course of the year. We set up a booth in which residents can learn about our research and then also ways that they could get involved with our own NHF community. Next, thank you. So soon after wrapping up our research and hosting Slap Day, which was a big success, the Measure A hearing came around. The decision to have Measure A funding dispersed equally or equitably was a pivotal concern for our Build Health team. Equitable Measure A funding would mean that historic South Central and other historically underfunded neighborhoods in Los Angeles County would receive long overdue funding. This is why members of the Build Health team, including myself, knew how important it was to voice our concerns and advocate in front of the Board of Supervisors for changes. Fortunately, there was large community support and turnout on behalf of the park equity movement, and Measure A was passed in 2016. So about 13% of Measure A funding, that's around $12 million per year, will go to parks in high need areas across Los Angeles County. And we will start to see these fundings implemented in the upcoming year, 2021, and soon, slowly but surely, start to see some of the changes that are going to come because of Measure A. Next, please. Thank you. So while seeing the low park grades for our community was disheartening, the truth is the results were not at all surprising. Graffiti, broken lights, indecent facilities, these are things that we hear about and see about in our parks all the time. And before being involved with NHF and similar organizations, many of my peers and I thought of these conditions in our community as something we have to accept as fact. Youth in underserved communities like my own realize and see the injustices and are looking to be mobilized. Youth are looking to be engaged, and it shows them and just by showing them the connection between their lived experiences, the policies disenfranchising them, the history, you can show them that their conditions are not unchangeable. By showing them the connection between generations of obesity and heart disease in their families, and the built environment, and green space, and healthy foods, they learn that they can reverse the inequities facing their communities. By identifying the problems and encouraging them and supporting them to find solutions is really the most important part about community building and youth engagement. Thank you so much for listening, and let me pass it off to Alessandro. Hopefully that was clear and concise.
Thank you so much, Naomi. It was really great and wonderful. I was very inspired by all three panelists and to hear about community building and empowerment of people, and really speaks about the idea of procedural equity that the toolkit that the PI put together really highlights. So again, thanks to the three of you so much. I'm gonna pass it over to Norma Y. Garcia for her talk.
Thank you, Alessandro, and thank you so much to the Prevention Institute and NRPA for the invitation and for bringing together a panel of park equity heroes and heroes in their communities, as well as over 300 purpose-driven professionals across the country. I want to start off with if we can go to the next slide, talking about a monumental, in the next slide, monumental study for Los Angeles County. And this was the moment where we really pivoted towards a park equity agenda in Los Angeles County. I had the privilege in 2016 to work on the Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Recreation comprehensive and countywide park needs assessment. And for the purpose of today, I'm going to just refer to P&A for short. It was an unprecedented effort to really document every public park in Los Angeles County, in every 88 city, in the 140 unincorporated communities, and really look at the size, the amenities in the parks, the needs in regards to deferred maintenance, and the densities and the access that community had to those public parks. The P&A really documented the lived experiences of people across the county who have known for decades that not all communities have equitable access to safe, well-maintained, and programmed parks and open space. In fact, what this map showed is that in very high need high need parks, which are in red and orange, are also communities of color. And there was a clear division between those that had parks and were accessible to the public and those that were not. And you see, if you're not familiar with Los Angeles County, but it's the communities of the East LA, it's the Southeast Los Angeles, it's the Southeast, it's the Northeast, very traditional communities of color. The P&A also established a common baseline and fluency for park equity and data across sectors and jurisdictions. And Francisco talked about the power of building as well. 148 community meetings were held throughout the county. A 40+ stakeholder community comprised of community-based organizations, as well as a technical advisory committee, all together came forth and has served as a guiding light for park investment in Los Angeles County. And what it's also done, it's provided us a deeper data-driven understanding of the magnitude of the issues we face. The P&A was also instrumental in developing a park equity movement. And you heard many of the speakers today talk about Measure A. I want to briefly share a little bit of comments about that. It brought together many community-based organizations and thousands of health and park advocates, culminating in the passage of Measure A, which was a park measure that was approved by Los Angeles County voters by nearly 75% approval. Next slide. Measure A will generate approximately $90 million annually in Los Angeles County, dedicating these resources to public parks, trails, beaches, and open space in Los Angeles County. The important piece as well is that it was the first equity measure in Los Angeles County and dedicating over 30% of the funding specifically to the communities in the red and orange, which are very high need communities of color. Measure A was a resounding commitment from the voters to park equity and park investment. As we were in the process of really rolling out the first set of grant programs for Measure A, COVID came like an avalanche and really hindered some of our opportunities to really roll out these fundings. And so we've pivoted a little bit, but I think what this has also done, it's helped us to really understand and deepen our understanding of that the communities that also are impacted with park inequities also are at this time suffering from much other inequities. And I call it the triple factor. Next slide. And I want to talk quickly about the intersectionality of park inequities that with park inequities, economic impacts, and health impacts. And here is a map, and it might be too small, but we will hopefully make these slides available for the public. Really, the same communities that have been impacted with park inequities are now at this time suffering with the highest cases of COVID-19. These communities now have also suffered the highest unemployment rate because of the economy, because of COVID and before, as well as I think this groundbreaking study that the Prevention Institute and UCLA have guided and provided to all of us, that there is direct correlation between access to parks and life expectancy. And so for me, that is a really urgent call to action. Park inequity has been a product of policies and practices that have unfairly and unjustly impacted communities of color, from racially biased planning decisions concentrating unhealthy land uses to redlining and to disinvestment of public infrastructure. The red we see in the park needs assessment map today is caused by purpose-built system that has been reinforced over generations to redirect resources away from densely populated poor and working class communities of color. So I think one of the lessons learned is that after COVID, we need to go in a different direction than pre-COVID. We really need to understand how our communities have been impacted by all of these factors that are much more deepened because of COVID. Unfortunately, those that have been impacted by COVID are the most vulnerable to economic shocks like job, home, and food insecurity. We know that from this research and our own experience working in communities that parks and public lands are a key resource to relieve toxic stresses. Parks have become the oasis, the respite for our emotional, physical, and emotional well-being during COVID. And yet those communities that don't have parks have not benefited from that emotional well-being that parks provide specifically during this pandemic. My department has worked tirelessly since the start of the pandemic, understanding this research that we really needed to focus our efforts in our communities of high varied park need, the red and orange communities. And so, for example, this summer, in 10 of those communities, what we did is we opened up our parks, we closed off our streets, and we allowed for communities to bike, to walk, to come out with their strollers and their wheelchairs and utilize the streets so that they can have some respite outdoors during this pandemic in a safe way. Just this morning, I was in Florence Firestone, and that's right in the middle of red community. And our park department, along with the partnership with the LA Food Bank, partnered today to provide over 40 pounds of food that will feed a family of 4 for a whole week. And we are feeding today about 1,800 families in Florence Firestone. We work together to ensure that children, especially of those family members and caregivers that did not have access to teleworking because they were either essential workers or very vulnerable frontline workers. We opened up our park facilities so that their children had an opportunity to be in a safe place and environment. And we did that during the summer, and we continue to do that in the evening hours. We've opened up our gyms for our homeless neighbors. 4 of our gyms are serving as 24-hour homeless shelters, as well as 11 of our gyms to ensure that if there's inclement weather, our homeless neighbors can come and find a shelter, a warm shelter in one of our gyms. Our parks have never closed. They've remained open and continue to be locations for COVID testing sites. And we're currently preparing for serving as distribution sites for the vaccine. And knowing this, we've concentrated our efforts specifically in our communities, our most vulnerable communities. It's because of these compounding factors that this department has focused our work and our hearts. We tailor precise strategies and interventions to aid people in crisis. More than ever, parks are a lifeline in our communities, an entry point to care and social safety nets, and an anchor to those that are most impacted by the crisis to seek refuge, to seek rest, for resilience. Next slide. One of the key pieces that we did is we recalibrated our department to really ensure that equity was the focus of our mission. And so we know that we are a community-based department that is there in the front lines with community. And we wanted to make sure that our mission reflected this work. The Prevention Institute and UCLA's groundbreaking a study that links life expectancy to access to parks and green space is a sounding of an alarm and a call to action. So where do we go from here? One is, many of you may say, I do not have a Measure A, or I do not have a park needs assessment. However, let me share with you that together we can advocate at a federal level. There is something we can do. In 1935, President Roosevelt created the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. It was an effort that was developed after the Great Recession to ensure that there was an investment in public investments, as well as put back to work about 8 million people. What also that effort did is it created and developed over 8,000 new or improved parks across the country, excuse me. So our collective call to action is to take an urgent message to the federal government, to our state, to our local governments, to inform them and to ensure that existing funding measures like the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund and future investments that can serve to heal communities from past inequities by supporting community infrastructure like parks and investments also in workforce development, and ensure that those resources are really funneled and prioritized in communities of color that have suffered way long before COVID, but have been exacerbated by COVID. I want to thank all of the panelists who are amazing community builders. And I specifically want to thank the Prevention Institute because they've really created a platform for organizations like myself, for park advocates like yourselves, to really talk to our policymakers about the critical link between parks, life expectancy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Norma. Such a powerful and impressive presentation to bookend our time together. Really appreciate you reflecting all of the policy and systems opportunities to help round out our panelists who really showed how they've been able to personally and successfully traverse from working on projects in their own community, but also advocating selflessly for the benefit of other residents in high need communities, not just their own. And that was really the purpose of today's panel, was to connect the park inequities that people feel in their everyday communities, in their neighborhoods, outside their front door, with the broader systems and policy issues that Elva and Alessandro have spoken about. So thank you all for painting a comprehensive picture for us. The first question that I'd like to pose to you from the Q&A is a tough question that I know Norma, you, Alessandro, Francisco have all, Veronica have all dealt with in one way or another. I think we've all faced it. Has to do with the relationship between new and better parks and just gentrification and displacement. I know this is a very deep topic, so I want to give folks an opportunity to just get a little bit and know that we want to continue this conversation because we can't cover it all. Norma, I want to turn it to you. Alessandro, then go to you because I know this is a deep area of research, and then Francisco, give you an opportunity if you want to, and then open it up for a little bit. So quick sound bites, if we will. Norma.
Thank you, Manal. And really, when we engage in new park development, I wasn't able to show some slides, but we need community advocates and partners to really help to ensure that those park spaces are really centered in existing community that serve and are for the communities who have suffered for so many years without park investment. And so we partner, and I think this is where the critical piece about power building is so valuable, that government agencies can't do it alone. We have to set the policies, protocols, procedures. We have to invest in community organizations like Promesa Boyle Heights, like Pacoima Beautiful, to partner with us. And we also need to partner with other government agencies and go beyond our scope and partner with affordable housing, agencies and nonprofits, so that we ensure that when we make significant park investments, we're also ensuring that we're also making investments in affordable housing. And I just want to mention that this last year, we just inaugurated the largest park investment in a single park in South LA in Los Angeles County. $80 million were invested in a single park. What was also done is that similar investment was done to work with Affordable Housing Corporation, so that as the time that we're planning and building the park, significant investments were also made in affordable housing to ensure that local residents can also benefit from the beauty of investments in parks.
Thank you, Norma.
This is awesome to hear, by the way, right? You know, I didn't know about that park, so I'm gonna look into that. From the policy perspective, I would, you know, a quick soundbite, I would encourage advocates to think about the next environmental bond, the next Prop 68, as embedding requirements or incentives for anti-displacement strategies, as well as money. So, you know, sort of thinking about the next bond as something that for parks of certain sizes or certain levels of investment, or in neighborhoods that are particularly vulnerable to gentrification, to include provisions to limit displacement.
Thank you, Alessandro. Francisco, are you able to chime in from your perspective here?
Just to add to what both Norma and Alessandro said, I think whatever it is must be written in the law and in the, you know, in the letter of the law, right? So I agree that the most important thing is, for example, I think there was some headway done, for example, even locally with Measure A, where this anti-displacement policy framework was incorporated. The teeth to that aren't as strong as we would like it to be, like in the sense of, you know, can we add an X percentage of the funding to be specifically for the printing, the organizing, the leadership development and capacity for residents that are working on these projects to have an element that includes tenants' rights, right? Because most of the park poorly invested communities that we spoke about today, the majority of the residents and the families are renters. And so it's really about, you know, renter rights, tenant rights, you know, what kind of rights do we have to stay in our homes and not have the wave of gentrification pushes out to the outskirts, right? Because we see the reversal of the what folks called white flight, right, into the suburbs. Now their children are saying, you know, I want to live in downtown, but that's pushing those of us that have been living in within the inner core of the urban core are paying the price. And so I think it just needs to be written into the law of whatever it is, letter of the law, and with some funding behind it.
Thank you so much. And I would add that I don't think we would have gotten the anti-displacement framework we got unless there were affordable housing advocates who got themselves in the mix on this. So they worked with the Regional Parks and Open Space District. They work with the park equity advocates. So it just underscores the point Norma made from a different perspective, which is we all have to break out of our silos. And of course, it wasn't as strong as we like, but it was a great example, I think, of park housing advocates getting in the mix on park equity. I wanted to ask another question. This is specifically for you, Norma, about RPOSD, but I actually think it can scale up to nationally. And the question is, a chat just covered it up. Excuse me. So each municipality is able to use their funding how they see fit. How can RPOSD help community members learn more about how cities are using the money? How can they connect with cities, park agencies to get clear updates and how to be able to provide input? And I will add to Araceli's question, I think, how do we get equity infused all the way from the framework down to the grassroots?
And that's a great question, Araceli and Manal. I think one of the things is we are currently working on specifically that one of the areas that we're going to require is that cities do and host community meetings to develop expenditure plans for Measure A. And that will ensure that there is community input and decision-making. Also, we had 148 community meetings as part of the development of the park needs assessment. So we want to make sure that the local jurisdictions are connecting back to their communities about whether these projects have evolved. But we do anticipate that there will be a lot of coordination, and that's an expectation that will be written in as part of the grant applications for the expenditures of Measure A. And I will also mention that as part of that, in the next coming month, we will issue an RFQ for community-based organizations, as well as architects, developers, planners, to be part of a list so that community organizations and groups and cities and nonprofits can utilize those expertise to help build their projects in the community. So we are really actually building in the need to prioritize community engagement as part of project development for the expenditure of Measure A.
Excellent. The next question I'm going to pose, I think, Veronica, I want to pose to you, but Naomi, you may also want to chime in. And I want to be brief on it because it's more of a project-based question, but I think this connects to what you just said, Norma. So the question from Kimberly, Veronica, is can you give us examples of how to effectively balance community expectations and funder interests when new parks are being developed? How do you work with those competing priorities?
You know, we've been fortunate to have really good funders that understand the opinion of our community members, and we make that really clear before embarking on any kind of project, that that's where our priority will lie, and let them know that, you know, we're building it for our community that's there now, not for new people that we want to come in necessarily. You know, this is for them. So I think for us, we've always made it very clear to our funders that that is the way, you know, we would like to approach it. So I think from the very beginning, addressing that is important to ensure that there is that clear understanding and working together.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One last one to direct at you, Naomi, and then I'm going to close us out as quickly as I can. Naomi, this is a question about issues of the park safety for all the community users, but also when the issue of homelessness and encampments come up. This is a hard issue. You don't have to have the full answer because we're all dealing with this as a society. So jump in, Naomi.
Yeah, I don't think I have the full answer for that, but I was just going to say that the priority of the community is obviously the most important, and that efforts to, you know, like decrease the homeless population and find housing for all individuals and housing affordability is extremely important and a part of making the built environment sustainable for everyone. And so I think that conversations like surrounding housing affordability should really be aligned with park access and park accessibility conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Naomi. And with that, I want to begin to just bring us in the home stretch, first by thanking our incredible speakers, our panelists, our moderator, and my colleagues at Prevention Institute. In addition to people whose faces you saw today, there were many faces you didn't see, including Christina Barriata, Lynn Stoller, and Diane Gonzalez, Roxy Rivas, Vanessa Shi, without whom this whole thing would not have happened. And of course, thank you, Javier, for your excellent interpretation and translation. We appreciate you deeply. I also just want to close by saying that this work, its complexities, its depth, its momentum are growing. I'm very pleased to share with you that Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has signaled a strong intent to develop a national initiative on advancing park equity policy solutions. Prevention Institute was just recently selected to work with them for a planning grant over the next 8 months. And our charge and that we are going to take seriously is the kind of work that was showcased here today, systems and policy level work to reverse the structures, systems, policies that produce park inequities in the first place, so that many, many more people across this country can have access to safe, accessible, health-promoting parks that have all the multi-benefits that Norma talked about. So we hope to continue this momentum with all of you on the call because this is a national effort that we all need to engage and together. So we thank you for that. We thank you everyone for being here today. We want to direct you to the webinar archives as well as the toolkit on our homepage, or toolkit webpage, all of the materials collected and discussed here today. Once again, thank you so much for joining. We look forward to connecting with you. Please be well and stay connected with us. Bye-bye.